Alright, I'd been lurking here for a while, reading other people's confessions, and I guess it's time I'd put one of mine out there. My name's William. Not my real name, obviously, but close enough. This isn't about some impulsive mistake, or a drunken night gone wrong. This was calculated, planned, executed with precision. And for a long time, I told myself it wasn't even a crime, just how things work. It started with a contract, a public tender. Infrastructure project. Big money. The kind of deal that sets companies up for years if they land it. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Open bidding, clear criteria, oversight committees, the usual bureaucracy designed to make things seem fair. But here's the truth. The winner had already been chosen. And I was the one who made sure of it. At the time, I wasn't some criminal mastermind. I was just a mid-level procurement officer who had figured out two things. 1. Nobody really checks as closely as they claim. 2. Everyone has a price, they just don't advertise it. I didn't wake up one day and decide to rig a tender. It was more gradual than that. Small compromises. Quiet favors. Adjusting a deadline here, clarifying a requirement there. Each step felt harmless on its own. Until one day, I realized I wasn't just bending the system anymore. I was the system. And that's when they approached me. So yeah, that's where things really began to shift. They didn't approach me in some dramatic, movie-style way. No shady alley, no whispered threats. It was a business lunch. Middle of the day, crowded restaurant, people talking over each other, waiters rushing around, completely ordinary. The guy introduced himself as Martin. Smooth, confident, the kind of person who makes eye contact just a second longer than necessary. He already knew who I was, what position I held, and this part stuck with me, exactly which tenders I had influence over. At first, it sounded harmless. He talked about efficiency, streamlining the process, and how certain companies were better suited for upcoming projects. I nodded along, pretending I didn't understand where it was going. Then he got to the point. "There's a tender coming up," he said, casually stirring his coffee. "We'd like certainty. Not a better chance. Not a competitive edge. Certainty." I remember laughing it off, making some comment about rules and oversight. He didn't argue. Didn't push. Just slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I didn't open it right away. But I already knew what was inside, and more importantly, what it meant. I didn't open the paper at the table. That would have made it real too quickly. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, kept the conversation going like nothing had happened. We talked about market trends, project timelines, normal, boring stuff. If anyone had been watching, they'd see two professionals having lunch. Nothing more. But I could feel it sitting there. That folded piece of paper felt heavier than it should have. I waited until I got back to my car. Sat there for a minute, engine off, just staring at the steering wheel. Part of me already knew I shouldn't look. Because once I did, there was no pretending anymore. I opened it anyway. No dramatic reveal, just a number. Clean, simple, written in pen. It was more than I made in a year. Underneath it, a single sentence. "We take care of those who help us win." That was it. No threats. No instructions. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it meant the choice was entirely mine. I wish I could say I immediately rejected it. That I crumpled the paper, tossed it out the window, drove home feeling morally superior. That's not what happened. I sat there for a long time, just staring at that number. Running calculations in my head, mortgage, debts, things I'd put off for years. It wasn't just tempting, it felt like a solution. A shortcut to a version of my life that actually worked. And the worst part? I started justifying it almost instantly. "It's not like I'm stealing," I told myself. "The project's getting done anyway. These companies all play the same game. If I don't do it, someone else will." That last one really stuck. It made the decision feel, inevitable. By the time I drove home, I wasn't thinking about whether it was right or wrong anymore. I was thinking about how it could be done. That shift, subtle but real, that's when I crossed the line. I hadn't accepted the offer yet, but I had already stopped saying no. The next few days, I didn't contact Martin. I didn't need to. That was the unsettling part. He knew I'd come around if I started thinking in the right direction. And I was already there. I began by reviewing the tender documents, but this time with a different mindset. Not, is this fair? Or, is this compliant? But, where can this be adjusted? That's the word I kept using. Adjusted. It sounded harmless. The criteria were the key. Technical requirements, experience thresholds, financial guarantees, things that looked objective but had just enough flexibility to be shaped. All I had to do was tilt them slightly. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to quietly eliminate competitors. I made a few notes. Small changes. A reworded clause here, a stricter qualification there. Each one defensible on its own. That's how I justified it. I wasn't breaking the system. I was working within it. But I knew exactly what I was doing. I was designing a competition where only one participant could realistically win. And I hadn't even been paid yet. Once I started, it got easier. That's the part people don't tell you. There's no dramatic moment where alarms go off in your head. It just becomes work. I revised the tender draft and circulated it internally. Legal signed off with minor comments. Compliance glanced at it, flagged nothing serious. That gave me a strange kind of confidence, like the system itself was approving what I was doing. I even added a few, neutral, complexities to make it look tougher. Extra documentation, tighter deadlines. The kind of stuff that discourages smaller firms from even trying. On paper, it looked like we were raising standards. In reality, I was narrowing the field. Martin's company, well, their company, fit every adjusted requirement perfectly. Not suspiciously perfectly, just enough to seem like they were exceptionally qualified. I kept telling myself, this is subtle. This is clean. No one's getting hurt. But there was a moment, late one night, staring at the final draft, where I realized something uncomfortable. If someone else had done this, I would have called it corruption without hesitation. I just wasn't ready to call it that when it was me. Up until that point, everything still felt reversible. Like I could walk it back, blame it on overthinking, tighten the criteria again, and pretend none of it happened. That illusion ended the moment I sent the final version out for publication. One click. That's all it took. The tender went live, and suddenly it wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a system in motion. Deadlines were set, announcements made, companies started preparing their bids. People were investing time and money into something that I already knew the outcome of. That's when Martin reached out again. No long conversation this time. Just a short message. Looks good. Let's finalize after submission. Finalize. I knew exactly what that meant. We met again, different place, more private. No paper this time, no numbers written down. Just a quiet agreement. A handshake that lasted a second too long. And that was it. That was the moment I actually accepted it, not just in my head, but in reality. After that, there was no version of this story where I was innocent anymore. Once the tender was live, everything took on this strange, almost surreal quality. My inbox filled up with questions from bidders, clarifications, requests for extensions, technical concerns. I answered them all carefully, professionally, and dishonestly. Some companies were sharp. They noticed the narrow requirements, the oddly specific experience clauses. A few even pushed back, asking why certain criteria were structured the way they were. I had responses ready, polished, reasonable, completely defensible. That was the scary part. I wasn't lying poorly. I was lying well. Meanwhile, Martin's company submitted their bid early. Clean documentation, perfectly aligned, no gaps. It was almost Too perfect. I remember feeling a flicker of anxiety seeing it, like maybe they'd overplayed their hand. But no one flagged it. Other bids came in too, but I already knew how they'd fall short. Missing one requirement here, slightly off there. Nothing dramatic, just enough to justify rejection. I started realizing something uncomfortable. From the outside, this looked exactly like a fair competition. And I was the one making sure it stayed that way. Evaluation day felt heavier than I expected. We sat in a conference room, 5 of us on the committee, stacks of documents, laptops open, coffee going cold. It looked official, procedural, exactly how it was supposed to be. If someone walked in, they'd see diligence, structure, accountability. What they wouldn't see is that I already knew the outcome. We went through each bid one by one. I played my role carefully, neutral tone, measured comments, even raising minor concerns about Martin's company just to avoid looking biased. That part took effort. Acting objective when you're anything but, it's exhausting. When we reviewed the other bidders, I didn't have to lie much. The criteria I'd adjusted did the work for me. I just pointed things out. Missing certification. Insufficient past project scale. Slight deviations that suddenly became critical. No one questioned it. By the end, the scoring aligned perfectly, with the system I had quietly shaped weeks earlier. And just like that, it was done. The winner was exactly who it was always going to be. And everyone in that room believed we had chosen them fairly. The official announcement came a few days later. I remember refreshing the internal system just to see it posted, even though I already knew what it would say. After careful evaluation, the contract is awarded to... And there it was. Martin's company. Clean, formal, unquestioned. Emails went out. Congratulations from management. A few polite thank you notes from the winning bidder. Even some respectful responses from the losing companies. That part stuck with me more than I expected. One message in particular, someone wrote that while they were disappointed, they appreciated the transparent and professional process. I read that line twice. Maybe 3 times. Transparent. Professional. I actually felt something twist in my stomach. But it didn't stop me. That same evening, I got a message from Martin. Short, simple. You did well. Let's close this. We met again. No public place this time. No pretense. Just a quiet office, a sealed envelope, and a kind of silence that said everything without needing words. When I took it, my hands didn't shake. That scared me more than anything else. You'd think that getting the money would feel like a climax. Like everything builds up to that moment, and then, relief, excitement, something. It didn't. I went home that night with the envelope sitting in my bag, and I didn't even open it right away. I just left it there, like if I ignored it, I could delay what it actually meant. Eventually, I did open it. Cash. Exactly what was promised. I remember counting it once, then again, slower the second time. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I was trying to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe? Or even guilt. What I felt instead was quiet. Too quiet. Life didn't change overnight. I still went to work the next day, still answered emails, still sat in meetings discussing future tenders. On the surface, everything was exactly the same. But internally something had shifted. The line I used to see so clearly, it was gone now. And the worst part? Nothing bad had happened. No investigation. No suspicion. Just money in my drawer and a growing sense that maybe I could do it again. For a while, it really did feel like I'd gotten away with it. Weeks passed. Then months. The project moved forward, contracts signed, work started. No audits, no complaints that went anywhere. If there were whispers, they never reached me. And that should have been the end of it. But cracks don't always come from outside. Sometimes they start small, almost invisible. It was an email that did it. Not even directed at me, just part of a broader thread. One of the losing bidders had filed a formal inquiry. Nothing aggressive, just asking for a more detailed breakdown of the evaluation scoring. Routine stuff. Except it wasn't routine for me anymore. I read the message 3 times, my chest tightening a little more each time. On its own, it meant nothing. These requests happen all the time. We had procedures, documentation, perfectly reasonable explanations. I had built those explanations. Still, something about seeing it written out, someone quietly questioning the process, made everything feel suddenly fragile. Like a hairline crack in glass. Not broken yet. But no longer solid either. I handled the inquiry myself. I insisted on it, actually, told the team it'd be faster if I responded since I was most familiar with the evaluation details. That was true. Just not in the way they thought. I pulled together the documentation, double-checked the scoring sheets, made sure everything aligned perfectly. Every justification had to match the criteria. Every number had to look inevitable. And technically it did. That was the brilliance, and the horror, of what I'd done. I hadn't forged anything. I hadn't invented fake data. I had just designed the system so the real data would point where I wanted it to. So I wrote the response. Clear, structured, polite. I explained the scoring, highlighted the key deficiencies in their bid, reinforced the objectivity of the process. If I'd received that email as an outsider, I probably would have accepted it. They did too. At least officially. The inquiry was closed without escalation. Everyone moved on. Except me. Because now I knew something for certain. I wasn't just capable of doing this. I was capable of defending it convincingly. After that, things didn't go back to normal. They just looked normal. I kept doing my job. More tenders came in, more meetings, more decisions. And every time, I caught myself thinking the same thing. I could steer this too. That thought didn't feel shocking anymore. It felt practical. That's what scared me. The first time, there had been hesitation, rationalization, that internal debate about right and wrong. Now, it was quieter. Cleaner. Like a switch had been flipped and left in the on position. I started seeing the system differently. Not as something to follow, but something to navigate. Influence. Shape. Exploit. And the worst part is, no one treated me differently. If anything, I was trusted more. Seen as reliable, competent, thorough. I got praise for the very skills I'd used to manipulate everything. That messes with your head. Because when the world rewards you for doing something wrong, it becomes harder to even see it as wrong anymore. And that's how it pulls you in deeper. Not with pressure, but with permission. So yeah, that's the story of the first time I rigged a tender. I never got caught. Not for that one. And for a long time, I told myself that meant I was careful, smart, untouchable. But looking back, that's not what it means at all. It just means the consequences didn't come in the way I expected. Because something did get damaged, it just wasn't my career. It was the way I see myself. Once you cross that line and realize how easy it is, you don't go back to who you were before. You start justifying faster, questioning less. The gap between, "I'd never do that," and, "maybe just this once," disappears. If you're reading this and thinking about doing something similar, don't. Not because you'll definitely get caught, but because you might not. And that's worse. Because then you have to live with knowing exactly what you're capable of, and how little it took to get there.